InspirED Virtual Learning Series. Welcome to InspirED. As we continue to watch the COVID-19 pandemic evolve in Ohio, this school year looks different for everyone, and that is why InspirED was created by the Ohio Department of Education's Office for Exceptional Children and OCALI. Each week, this virtual learning series brings you information and resources on a variety of topics to help support learning and successful outcomes for students. Whether you're an educator supporting students with disabilities, an administrator providing resources to educators, or a family member navigating your role during at-home learning, InspirED is for you. The content of this webinar has been pre-recorded, but we want to encourage your participation. If you have any questions or comments, we invite you to be part of the discussion by using the chat feature. Questions will be answered throughout the webinar, and later we'll be providing a link in the chat to a brief survey. By completing a survey, you'll be able to access a certificate verifying your attendance in this webinar. During this very unique time of learning, connecting and exchanging ideas is a key to inspiring success. Welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Hello, and welcome to today's session entitled A Closer Look at District Special Education Profiles, Reflecting on the Data to Drive District Decisions. I'm Shauna Benson, Program Director of the Teaching Diverse Learners Center at OCALI, and I'm joined today by Andrea DiFrancesco, who is part of the Urban Support Team with the Office for Exceptional Children. So Andrea, are you ready to get started?
Yes, I am.
All right, great. So let's get started with action step number 1, where we will learn how to access the district special education profile data. You would want to do this with your team to explore and look through the data for your individual district. We are going to take the link or use the link here on the slide to access that data from the ODE website. We will also put this link into the chat. If you were coming to the ODE website and just coming to the home page, you could type in special education profiles into the search window and also get to this location. So first we will get started by typing the here link at the top in the grayscale box where it says click here to access special education profile for any district. Once we're in the district search page, all we would have to do is type in a specific district name into the box. We'll just start out with Columbus or Columbus City Schools as the hub of Ohio. We can see that we picked Columbus City Schools from a lineup of other school districts that also have Columbus in the title, and then we will go directly to that profile. So this is actually where we will be accessing the majority of the data that we will be referring to in the data review. And you can see on the right-hand side of the page, there's a link that says, view the 2018-2019 profile for this specific district. There's also a bit of information on how to read the charts via a link, and also some additional information about students with disabilities as well at the bottom of that page. So this is where we will begin. Now we're going to head back into our slides and talk a little bit further about accessing this information. Please note that the 2020-2021 special education profile data is not yet public, but will be out soon. This data is available for district personnel who have internal district access. The new alternate assessment data is included in the district profiles. You will see 2 new indicators linked within the profile data. One related to alternate assessment in reading and one related to alternate assessment in mathematics. Please check back often to gain updates to new data that will be included in the profile year by year. The special education profile data will have a couple of different phases of release. Andrea, would you like to tell everybody a little bit of an overview about that release? And then we'll look specifically at each of those phases.
Yes, thank you, Shauna. So as Shauna said, the 2021 Special Education Profile will be released in 2 phases due to the new disproportionality indicators that were recently added. The phase 1 targets any indicator which may result in required action based on the data. And phase 2 targets the indicators that are informational for districts, but do not have required actions if the district misses a target. So on this slide, you can see that the phase 1 release of the indicators that could result in required actions are your alternate assessment, math and reading proficiency, discipline discrepancies, disproportionality, transition, timely correction of noncompliance, post-secondary outcomes, initial evaluations, your special education family survey, secondary transition planning, and then again, you have your disproportionality for placement and discipline. And then phase 2 of the release are your informational indicators. And these are your 4-year graduation rates, your indicator 2 dropout rates, 3B math and reading assessment participation, least restrictive environment for school age and preschool students, preschool outcomes, and federal graduation rates.
Great, Andrea. Thank you for sharing about the phases of release of the data and the specifics to each one. So this brings us to action step number 2, which is where we would follow up this data, the selection of the data and the access to the data with an actual internal review. And one of the things that you mentioned as we were talking, Andrea, was really about a district being able to collect that information and put it somewhere where they can take a broader look at it. And so you mentioned that you have a profile template. And in addition to that, you talked a little bit about the CrossDiscipline Team. Could you share a little bit more about the team and then a little bit more about the template?
Yes. So about the district CrossDiscipline Team, for that, you should have on your team district leadership, as well as your special education teachers and general education teachers, your special education directors and team, as well as curriculum. And that could include literacy, math, different departments. And the reason it's so important to include a cross-discipline team is because even though this is a special education report, it actually includes the entire district, because even though it is special ed, it doesn't just fall in the special ed world. It really encompasses the general education classroom as well. And since that encompasses all subjects, you need to make sure that it's all around. And then the special education profile, this here, the 2018-2019 district profile, is what Shauna had mentioned earlier and put the link in the chat box. And this is what we are actually going to use in order to look at the data and fill out the template that Shauna had mentioned. And so what I'm going to do first is, as you're looking at this slide, you can see it says essential question 2, are children with disabilities achieving at a high level? And the reason this slide is so important is because these questions lead you to understand what indicators, which are all these individual ones here, are located below that. And there are 5 essential questions within the profile. And so we're not going to focus on all 5 essential questions today, but I did want to point them out because they are important for you guys to know how the profile is broken up. And so what I'm going to do right now is I am going to take you to the district profile and point out a couple of the indicators and how to look at them. So this is what the profiles looks like from the district perspective. And a couple things I would like to point out to begin with is on the right-hand side, you see a couple different things. You see not met with a little caution triangle, and you also see your met. And what that means is whether or not the district hit the target score. And if they did not, they have a not met, and the triangle means that they have corrective action, or they have not met, which means they did not meet the indicator, but they do not have required actions. And then if they have the green met, then that means that they hit the target score, which is listed here. And then if you were to click on the links over here, this is what's really important. I'm going to open up alternate assessment. and you have your charts in here. So as you look through this, you have trend data for the past 3 to 5 years. And this is what your district really wants to look at and begin analyzing with the templates that I'm going to show you in a moment. And so you can pull out your data years here, and then you have these nice little graphs that provide you with more information on the left. And if you scroll down, every time you see that more information button, you can click on that, and you will then have access to all the trend data. And so you can see this one is 5 years, but alternate assessment was only 3 years because that one has only been out for 3 years. So it's still a new indicator. And so this is the data we are going to look at when we start filling in our template. And so what I want to do first is I want to show you an example of the template so you can see how we fill it in. And then I will show you the blank template that you guys will have access to. And so at the beginning, so here is our template. And as you can see, we have this separated by reporting year of when the profile was released and also the data year. Because of how the data is calculated, it typically comes out a year, the reporting year, the profile is released a year after the data. And then because of the national pandemic, it was not released last year. So you can see that these were released together. So I wanted to point that out to you. But in order to pull the data is what we do is I have all of the possible indicators here. And if you notice, you're going to say, well, there's a lot more here than were in the profile. And that is because the profile is going to be released in 2 phases. And so right now we only have 1 phase that is released. And so what we do is we go to the profile. So indicator 12, early childhood transition from part C to B. So when we go to our profile, we want to look for indicator 12. So we would scroll up to that data. We would open this up. And then when we did that, we would notice our numbers over here on the right. So this is a 91.30%. So when we go to our template, we would fill in 91.30%. And because we were below the target of 100%, we are flagged for this indicator, and that box will automatically turn red when you type that in because that is not met. And then we could do the same thing for our 13 secondary transition. So if I go back here, I want to scroll down to indicator 13. Make it a little quicker. And then once I have here, my data was a 99.90. So you go back to your template and you fill in 99.90. And again, I did not meet that target, so I was flagged. And then that'll automatically turn red. So when you do this to begin with, and you start with your blank template, it can be overwhelming. But once you fill in all this previous information over here to the right, you no longer have to go through and fill that in, and you would just continuously add to what's already there. So even though it seems like a lot of work right now, it's actually you do a lot of it now, and then in the future, you won't have to do all of this again because you would save this template and use it year by year to continue to track your trends and where your district is going in relation to special education data. And I guess I should go through and explain this whole chart to you, which I didn't do at the beginning. My apologies. The beginning is your essential question 1, and then down the left are all your indicators that fall under that. And then you come to blue, which are your essential question 2, are children with disabilities achieving at high level? So these are all your achievement standards on the left. So you go all the way from your reading participation rate all the way to least restrictive environment. And then I do want to point out this orange box in the middle it says COVID, no data. And that's because there was not state testing last year because of the pandemic. So you will not have scores for there. So we mark that in orange. And if you go over to the right, you will see a gray box. And that's because those indicators did not exist for those years. And so they are blacked out. And then if you scroll down, you will come to essential question number 3. Are youth with disabilities prepared for life, work, and post-secondary education? And again, you will see that some of these are to be released in phase 2. And then again, we have another gray box, and that's because those indicators did not exist in those years. And then we scroll down to essential question 4. Does the district implement data to improve service and results for students with disabilities? And then the last question we have is our essential question 5. And does the district implement data to improve service and results for students with disabilities? And these are your disproportionality indicators, and these are new this year. So you only have the 3 years of trend data. And on this one, you will see on your left, those are all your ethnicity groups, your racial and ethnicity groups on the left. And I grayed out the ones that did not match this district. And so you can see here that they have boxes that are gray, and then the ones that are labeled are the ones that they actually had data for in that district. And then this goes through the indicator 9 and 10. And so when you fill this out for yourself, you would just gray out the ones that do not work for your district. Shauna, is there anything that I missed that you would like me to go back to and point out?
No, I think that's great. I think when we get into our step 3 and 4, we will kind of dig into some of the data that you've put into this table. So I'm excited to do that next.
Awesome. And then I am going to turn over sharing back to you.
So Andrea, it was great that you showed us in the profile on the website that the more information tabs really have some great additional information, including those wonderful graphs that you showed us. And I'm so thankful that you shared with us that template that you've created and actually started to show us how to fill that out a little bit. I think that is a resource that we will add both into our chat so that everybody will have access to that via a link. If others are interested in using that, I think that would be a wonderful tool also for districts to use with their teams as well. So let's get into action step number 3, where we're actually kind of digging into this great data that we put into the table. And specifically, we're going to be looking for things like trend data or correlation data. We're going to ask questions of the team, like, did we see any irregular spikes somewhere? And if we did, which indicator was it related to? Where were students receiving Tier 1 instruction? We could go back and we could check some of that LRE data. So I know that when you and I went through the sample data that we were reviewing, we found some very interesting trends along the way. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about one of the first trends that we saw within the data set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this first set of trend data, this is for our disproportionality indicator, other health impairment minor. And so on the right, you have your data from 2017, 2018, and then you have in the middle is 2018, 2019, and then on the left you have your data for 2019, 2020. So in 2019, if you're looking for your at your white student column, you will see that they had a 2.54. So they were flagged because they were over the risk ratio of 2.5. And then in your 2018, 2019 data, they were again flagged because they had a 2.56. And again, they were over the risk ratio of 2.5. And then the same for 2019, 2020. They had a risk ratio of 2.68, and they were over the risk ratio of 2.5. So when you're looking at this, you're just above your 2.5 cutoff, but you still want to know why. And so a couple of things you can look at this data for is, are we using the right assessments for this group of learners? So when you are doing your ETR meetings, are you using the right assessments for the students? A lot of districts have one assessment that they use and only one assessment, but that's not always the best way to go about it. So are there different assessments your district has access to? Also, are the teachers and ETR team members aware of the different disability categories and how to properly identify the right disability category for the students? And so for this one, different disabilities require different types of testing in accordance with the planning form of the ETR. So are the teachers aware of that? Your special ed teachers, your gen ed teachers, your district administration? And is that data being analyzed the right way when it's put into the planning form and then further into the section 2 of your ETRs? And then also when we look at the data, look at it from a district and a building level. Where are the discrepancies coming from? Is there one building or one teacher over identifying students in this area? And are the ETR teams placing the data over personal opinions? We all know that there's times that parents will come in and be really pushing for one thing over another, but we need to go back to the data and try to keep our emotions and personal opinions out of it, because the data is what makes the decisions.
Wow. So even within that data, there are some trends that we noticed, and that kind of brings us to the next trend that we saw over time, and it's very similar to the trend that we just looked at. Could you talk a little bit about this trend where we have this kind of flat line effect, where we have this rate and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere? It seems to be stagnating there. And I know you talked a little bit about what data to specifically look at to find out like where is this coming from. But now, why is it remaining there, so to speak?
Yeah. And so for this one, again, we're looking at our disproportionate data for in-school suspension of 10 days or fewer for Black and African American students. And as we look at the 17-18 data, you can see that Black students are more likely to be suspended for 10 days or less than their peers. And so by a risk ratio of 2.71. So in 2018-2019, the risk ratio was 2.96. And in 2019-2020, the risk ratio was 2.78. It is not moving. And since it is above the 2.5 target risk ratio, I would look at the district processes and procedures for in-school suspension. Are these processes and procedures clear to all teachers in what they need to do before students are suspended? And then also use your EMIS data to determine why and where the in-school suspensions are occurring and why. Sometimes we know that at different points of a year, students are more likely to be suspended than another. In different classrooms, students are more likely to be suspended than another. So is there any trends about where the suspensions are happening? Or I should say, are there any trends in where the issues are occurring that is causing the suspension to take place? And then also, I would take a look at teacher training. Do they understand strategies they could utilize in the classroom to de-escalate situations before they turn into a problem? And then once you take a deeper look at this data and determine where the in-school suspensions are occurring, the district can target training to improve the in-school suspension data, processes, and procedures. And so instead of doing district-wide trainings, let's target our trainings to the people who really need them.
That's a great point, Andrea. Making sure that we kind of get to the root cause of what's happening and really kind of target the solution there as well. So another thing that we found in the data set was that we saw data that was kind of trending in the wrong direction. And in this case, they were cruising along and everything was okay, but the data kept creeping up and still kind of trending. It's doing that, and we don't want it to go any further so that they would be in the red. So talk a little bit about this data trending in the wrong direction and what we can do about that.
Yeah, so the data we're looking at here is for the identifications of students as intellectually disabled by racial category. And for this, so in 2017-2018, Black students have a 1.59 risk ratio to be identified as intellectually disabled. In 2018-2019, that risk ratio increases to 1.90. And in 1920, the risk ratio increases again to 2.14. So even though the district is still under the target risk ratio of 2.5, the district needs to take a look at their data to understand why the numbers are trending higher. Where in this case, higher is not good because you want to stay below the 2.5 risk ratio. So for this one, the district really needs to take a look at their ETR and disability identification data. So why are students being identified for intellectual disabilities? And again, start with looking at building and teams within the district. So is there one building or one team identifying students in one category over another on a regular basis? And do the ETR teams understand, again, that different disability categories and how to identify the correct disability categories for students? Again, there's different testing for different disability categories. So are they doing the right testing? Do they have the right assessments in place? Are they analyzing the data the right way? Are they putting the data above their personal opinions and emotions? And so you really need to make sure your teams are trained all the way from your intervention specialist to your general education teacher to your district administration who sits in on those ETR meetings. And then also, again, look at your different types of assessments that are being used during the ETR process to make sure that they fit the different disabilities that are being looked at, and there isn't any unknown bias that we're not aware of with those tests.
Right. One of the things that we noticed in the data set within the template or the table was that we saw on occasion these kind of anomalies or these red flags in the data, and we kind of honed in on those and targeted them. How do we dig deeper into those red flags?
Yeah, so this indicator we're looking at measures how likely Black students are to be suspended or expelled over their peers. And on the right, in 2017-2018, Black students have a risk ratio of 1.24. And it increased in 2018-2019 to a risk ratio of 3.26, and then decreased again in 2019-2020 to 1.88. So it really jumped in that 18-19 school year from a 1.2 all the way up to a 3.26, which is huge. And so you really want to look at what caused the district risk ratio for suspending Black students over their peers to skyrocket in that year. So the district could look at out-of-school suspension data building by building. So what building, if possible, suspended students or expelled them at a higher rate than normal in the previous years? And also look at when are the students being suspended? Is there a month or time of year this happens more often, and why? And what is the district doing to support teachers in training them on social emotional responses and de-escalating strategies to problems in the classroom? And also, I know it's hard, but asking the tough question, what happened in 2019, 2020 that impacted the data? Do we have a lot of new teachers? Do we have a lot of new principals? Did we have a principal leave? And so maybe we had an interim principal for the year and they just weren't as on top of discipline as the previous. Do we have a new or old PBIS system that we need to revamp and really look at and doing different things? So all of this is different information that we need to analyze when looking at why we have these areas that jump like that so that we don't have them happen again in the future.
Right. One of the additional pieces that we saw too was that sometimes these trend data sets, once we dug a little bit deeper into the why, like why this is happening, it actually took us into some correlation data. So, jumping from achievement scores to LRE, we saw that there was kind of a connectedness between those two. Can you share a little bit more about when trend data gets connected a little bit and becomes more correlation-based data?
Yeah, definitely. So for this one, we started looking at indicator 3C reading and math proficiency data. And for this district, they were flagged for 3 consecutive years by not hitting the target for this data. So for 2015-2016, the reading proficiency rate, the district scored 11.25%. And in 2016-2017, that rate increases to 18.73%. And in 17-18, the reading proficiency rate increased to 19.44%. So the data is trending in the right direction, but it's not there yet. And then it had the similar trends in math as well, where in 2015-2016, we started at a 9.4%, but in 2017-2018, it increased to a 19.28%. So again, the math is trending in the right direction. We're just not where we need to be yet. So for this one, what is causing the district to improve their trend data for reading and math proficiency for students with disabilities so they can keep doing it and we can keep improving upon it? So this is one of those ones where we want to keep doing what we're doing, and so we want to make sure we're doing it right. So for this one, really look at your teachers' inclusive instructional strategies. Is your curriculum screened, and is the content and access there? So are all students getting access to the general education curriculum? And are your MTSS structures and processes for co-planning to serve students in place in the right way? And when looking at your MTSS structures and processes and co-planning, also look at your LRE data, and that's what's in the bottom chart. There is a positive trend for the number of students with disabilities in their least restrictive environment for more than 80% of the day. In 2015-2016, only 35.33% of students were in their least restrictive environment for more than 80% of the day. In 2017-18, that number increased to 40.88% of students were in their least restrictive environment. So how does having students in the proper least restrictive environment improve the reading and math proficiency rates? It improves because it gives them access to grade level materials, access to general education peers, higher and more rigorous instruction. And so what is the process in your district for determining LRE during IEP meetings? Because it is not SPED category placements. It is based on the data and not the category in which the student has a disability. And then you can see that these correlate because the more students are put in their least restrictive environment, then the data increases as well, and students are able to access that general education curriculum and make their proficiency scores increase.
Yeah. That's super exciting data to look at. And even though they're not quite there yet, the trend is so clearly going in the right direction. And they definitely have some better practices in place. And we can see that heading in the positive direction. So that brings us actually to our last action step, which is the root cause analysis. And we've actually talked through some of how that digging deeper into the data really occurs around some of the trend and correlation data. But we also want to talk about this as well with another example from the table. So let's kind of pop over here if you would talk a little bit about the root cause specifically in this alternate assessment data set.
Of course. So in this alternate assessment data set, we really want to look at that in 2017, 2018, we had 2.99% of students flagged to take the alternate assessment. And in 2018, 2019, we had 3.23% of students who were taking the reading alternate assessment. And so we really want to look at why are those numbers increasing? And so you should really start with your EMIS data and break it down again, building by building, possibly school by school, grade by grade, to see which students are taking the alternate assessment and see if there's any red flags. Are there any schools or grades that are sort of sticking out amongst the others? But then also you want to break down the data by teacher to see if is there a special ed teacher who is taking that alternate assessment and having teachers take it more than others. So are they assigning students to take that alternate assessment more than they possibly need to and more than their peers are doing it? And then also take a look at was the decision tool used during the IEP meeting to determine if they were eligible to take the alternate assessment. And I think Shauna is going to take a minute to talk about the new decision tool because it outlines what the criteria is for participation. And if there are any other questions, then that is where you bring in your SST consultant for assistance and possibly ask them for additional training on that decision-making tool to make sure that you are allowing the right students to take the alternate assessment test.
Absolutely. So when we see trends kind of creeping up like this, that root cause analysis does take us right back to that decision-making tool. And I know you mentioned maybe teachers needing training over time, and this is another case where possibly that could be the case. Not only teachers, but also administrators. And I think about both general ed, special ed teachers, and even families really need to better understand the decision-making tool. And there are some resources available, some question and answer kind of resources that are available both for families and for educators around the new decision-making tool. But it includes really ensuring that students who take the alternate assessment meet very specific criterion as being a learner who has the most significant intellectual or cognitive disability. And there are characteristics that the team would take a look at, and then supports and services that the team would take a look at as well to make those decisions. And all those decisions, thinking about root cause, need to go back to data sets around individual students. So for every question that's on the decision-making tool, data should be backing up the answer that the team makes and within the tool and filling in the blanks or the boxes to make an overall decision as to whether or not to participate or the student is eligible to participate in the alternate assessment. So we will try to put some linkage also in the chat box to some resources related to the decision-making tool more specifically if you have questions about that as well. All right, Andrea. Well, that kind of wraps up our time. I think it's time to say goodbye to everybody and just thank everybody for joining us today. And I want to thank you for being here, Andrea, to share a little bit about the template that you took us through today and all of those decision-making conversations that teams would be engaging in over the course of their review of their personal district data. So thank you so much for being a part of the conversation today.
Yeah, no problem. And if districts need help to fill out that template, their state support team who are local can easily help them access this because they know all of that data like the back of their hand. So don't hesitate to reach out to them for further assistance.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Everything was so helpful. And we appreciate everything. So we're going to say bye to our friends who are joining us today, and hopefully we can follow up again at some point in time with another conversation. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks for participating in today's webinar. We've provided a link in the chat to a brief survey, and we'll also follow up by email with the same link and additional information about this series. This series is for you, and we welcome any feedback. By completing the survey, you'll be able to access a certificate verifying your attendance in this webinar. This recording and related resources will be available on demand through our website, OCALI.org. There, you'll also find upcoming and past episodes of InspirED. And you can keep the conversation going on social media. Find us at OCALI Official on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and by using the hashtag InspirEdOhio. As we move forward together in virtual learning, our connections help to inspire success. InspirED Virtual Learning Series.